happen again.
This happened on Tuesday, and we know it was really hot that day. Hot car. Joining us live in the Alert Center.
How long did you last in a hot car?
Facts that the heat index that day was 105 degrees.
Hot car. We don't yet know about a potential third suspect who was seen speeding away from federal agents at the scene. The whole thing had been a mystery to neighbors.
Hot car.
This is not an accident. This is pure negligence.
So you record kind of the general idea of what you're aiming for, like regarding like a character and something the character does, and then it'll print out a bunch of weird stuff.
Yeah.
You can either ask the chat bot to change some things, or you can just take out chunks and then have it just like refine like a paragraph,
Right.
and then add that back in. It's a real
Yeah.
mix of like prompting and kind of
Coaxing.
well, more like demanding, like you're speaking to a little kid. Like you really have to be
Right.
very clear about what you want it to do, and it'll
Right.
mess up. It'll mess up pretty good a lot of times. Like it'll just add in like random things about. Well, like in the, you noticed I removed a bunch of messages.
Yes.
What it was.
Should we explain to Ashleigh what it is that we're
We will.
talking about?
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
So what it was printing out, it changed the instrument from a drum to a guitar for just randomly
Yes, I saw
out of
that.
nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So Ashleigh, what this was this was conceived like in Venice Beach, like on the beach.
Okay.
I had this idea.
Yeah.
So I basically said to Marcus one day, you know, I don't really care for Def Leppard, but I like the drummer. I like his arm. I want to know more about the arm. Like, what did it do after that?
Oh, I love that idea.
So what happened is that basically from the very beginning, it has a name now too. Armstrong, the drummer's left arm, was really never a fan of the band, and just
Def
kind of
Leppard, yeah.
struggled along in silence for many years, and they were getting very popular, and so he conspired to sever his relationship, and that came about in a fateful car accident where there was a swerve and an arm went out the window and the car rolled over, and that was it. And then the medical team tried to reattach the arm, and it was rejected. And then Def Leppard's drummer learned how to drum with just one arm. Meanwhile, Def Leppard arm hit the streets and had all kinds of adventures. Got strung out on heroin, hanging with prostitutes, prostituting itself, and like he was like busk, for spare change with like a drumstick and a bucket, and he was really good because his dream was to play like jazz. He wanted to be like a bebop drummer. And one night, floating through the sky, through the air, came along Forrest Whitaker's eye. And he liked what he heard, and he decided to represent Armstrong, and got him booked into some cool jazz clubs, got him cleaned up, and he had his own career. And then the Def Leppard guy, you know, he had his own thing, and eventually the drummer like reunited with the Arm, and the Arm is now on display on his fireplace mantle. They're both like this. The Arm retired, and you know, and then yeah, and then weirdly, fairly recently, Rick Allen, the drummer guy, he got attacked in Florida. Like, so I don't know what that was about, but some guys were trying to beat him up.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the story.
That's hilarious. I love that.
It's
It's
weird.
going to be quite interesting.
So-
we've had this idea going for many years now. We just haven't put it together, but we're going to.
We totally abandoned it.
Nice.
Totally abandoned it and did something entirely different. A stop motion animation series about the last days of Michael Jackson.
Interesting.
It's brutal.
Yeah, you'll have to watch that someday too.
It's a 12-part series.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's bad. I mean,
Yeah.
it's bad in every way. Like technically, content-wise, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But it's
horrible,
really,
But
you know, if you have that particular sense of humor, though, it's very funny.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, but it's definitely not for anybody. It's just not for anybody, really. It's
No.
just a dream we had, you know.
That's cool.
It took about like 4 or 5 hours for each 3-minute episode to film, and I would get so impatient having like moving pieces of paper around on a board with a overhead camera clicking, that it's all very rushed, except for one character, this butterfly, that was really fun to move around and animate. That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like it.
Yeah, so
That's cool. I like that idea.
we've been doing it for like 5-6 years now. It's pretty.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many podcasts, many weird, just weird stuff, like very strange. We did a movie review where we talk about movies that Alexei hadn't seen. It's called Haven't Seen It, and he reviews movies based on just the title alone. It's pretty funny.
Ah.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Survivor Series playlist of interviews talking to all kinds of people, primarily survivors of institutions, youth camps, that kind of stuff. Alexei did a really lengthy interview with former staff member from Sunset Bay down in Mexico. That was very strange.
Awesome.
We had a lot of concern in general about talking to former staff in the first place.
Yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. I talk to a lot of former staff too.
Do you? Like, there's this weird ethical dilemma, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's the ones that want to talk are always the ones that almost every single one of us has what we refer to as the good staff. There's always one in almost every program, and every kid has one almost. And it's that one person that like wasn't like the rest. And those are the ones that are willing to talk about this stuff.
Right, that's like this guy, but the problem with that is that those good staff should have gotten the hell out of there a long time ago.
Right.
Like,
I'm actually working with a current staff right now who works at Mingus Mountain Academy, and these places brainwash them so badly.
yeah.
Like it's bad. it's obviously it's not what they do to the kids,
Right.
but they use the same tactics on staff as they do on the kids and parents.
Well, sure. That's how they get former students as staff too. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
Of course. I think that's probably that problem. I think is probably a better reason to talk to them than not.
I agree.
Than not, because that is the kind of awareness that isn't lit up.
Right.
It's just
And I
not.
keep telling survivors that give me pushback about talking to staff. I'm like, guys, these are our biggest, most valuable allies, because they can say, yeah, everything that they're saying is true and everything that they're saying did because I saw it,
Right.
but they don't have the stigma that we do of being a troubled kid.
Right.
Because they don't have that we have an agenda, we're out to get them for some. We absolutely do. But in most people's minds, staff don't have that same negativity attached to it. Oh, they're just doing this out of spite kind of attitude that we get a lot, and former staff don't have that. And they can validate and say, yeah, what these kids are saying is absolutely true. It's worth listening to what they have to say. Well, and a lot of them, it also comes with this, once they actually do realize what's going on, there's I can't leave because who else is going to protect these kids from what the other staff are doing? That's
Right.
one of the most common arguments.
But here's the problem, with all of this. I mean, I'm listening, but there is a dynamic that fits the mold for someone to become a staff, right? So generally they're between 22 and 28 when they start, and generally they're in debt from college or in debt from something. And I can't remember the other criteria, but someone did an assessment of all the things that staff sort of fit into a box, on Reddit. Someone did that, and there's clearly a method to who becomes staff and who ends up staying and the why, and that thing about not leaving, I don't buy that, because I don't think that you're actually helping by standing by as others are abusing. I also want to say that when I came home, that whole thing where I had, I stopped talking and I couldn't figure out what the truth was. Was it abuse? Was that abuse? And how one of the main dynamics in that were the good staff. And that caused so much confusion in my head about what was real and what wasn't,
I definitely had that too.
It's tricky. It's a very tricky thing.
It's funny you use that word because one of the former staff I've talked to did too. He said it's a very tricky thing to deal with.
These same attitudes of oh, I'm doing a good thing. This is good. I'm going to help. I'm going to this, I'm going to work at this therapeutic program for kids, and it's really great. And people explain things in those terms because either you're ignorant, or you're a true believer, or the people that you're talking to about your new adventure in work, they have no idea, about anything negative. Or if you tell someone you're going to go to work at a troubled teen center, and someone says, "Oh, that's terrible," you're not going to not take the job probably because someone else told you it was bad.
Right.
And then you find out. But then you're there. You're right there. And now you're becoming responsible for the actions of the whole place. So if you leave and say, "Oh, I work here," knowing now the kind of negative aspect of it all, and you go somewhere else and say, "Oh, I worked over there," they might look at you like, "Oh, well, we don't want to have anything to do with you."
Right.
Right? Now you have a stigma. So
yeah, but I also think that's why we see the same staff jumping around from program to program. Is that not correct, Ashleigh?
Very common,
yeah.
Right?
Because I think that once you get into that industry, you're in it.
You are. Yeah, and actually,
Very true.
Alexei, you know about this, that local singer that I know who was a former staff.
Yeah.
He actually attempted suicide 7 weeks after leaving his last program.
Right.
Like,
Oh, wow.
there's trauma there too.
Yeah. This is
It's
it.
I don't doubt it.
Different.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. It's just, my issue is that
They
we
did it.
were the product.
Right.
We were the product, and they get a check, and they are dealing with a vulnerable, level of clientele that are extremely vulnerable and extremely voiceless and have no rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they often don't see it like that. And it's a very interesting conversation because
Are we recording this?
yeah, because
Okay,
a lot of people like hearing this kind of stuff might get upset and say, well, you're giving them too much allowance. And I think that you're saying some of those things because exactly, Alexei, you're the ones who were mistreated in a much different way than someone at work would be mistreated by their employer.
Yes.
They don't match up as far as
and my story is actually a really good example of that because we got stuck out in a blizzard that we absolutely could have and probably should have died in. And the oldest staff there was only 22.
wow.
With no training at all whatsoever. Just thrown out there. And then headquarters stopped responding to their calls on day 6 out of 12.
That's
And
it.
being, imagine being a young kid like that, being I'm responsible to keep all these kids alive, and I very well know that I might die doing this.
Right. That's also part of the problem
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that, and you can see this all over the place too, is people who are completely unqualified to be working in that kind of environment.
Uh-huh.
But Ashley, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know about wasps, but do you think that the Litchfields kind of started out thinking one thing, and then it just became this huge, massive thing that got way too big for them to even comprehend on a small scale, and that's how you end up with dog cages in Mexico? Or do you think that they plotted that out?
I don't think it was planned out. I don't think they planned for it to get as big as it did. I think they started just like everybody else with one standalone program, and it just exploded into what it did. But they ran with it.
Yeah.
No, I have to.
Absolutely. But yeah, look at all of the issues that are rampant in every single program, like understaffing, trying to fill beds rather than and make a dime rather than take care of these kids properly. And it's so easy, I think, to just say, yeah, we'll take them because every kid that comes in those doors is a paycheck.
Yeah.
Ashley, were you not in Montana?
I was. Yeah, I was at Mission Mountain School, the school that closed down after that congressional hearing about institutional child abuse
Oh,
in
okay.
2008.
Okay. Interesting. It's what's weird about Montana is it seems to be running on two different tracks regarding these programs.
Oh, it absolutely is.
It's like they're trying to shut them down and they're expanding at the same time. It's weird.
Actually, now Montana only has 7 programs.
Oh wow. That are known.
We actually have. I worked last year on some legislation, or earlier this year on some legislation involving regulation of institutional programs for youth.
Gotcha.
And I've actually extensively looked into Utah also. Utah's the hotbed of this.
Yeah, that's true.
And Montana only having 7. When I heard that Montana only had 7 programs left, I was in shock. But a lot of those actually did get shut down because of deaths.
Oh, well, good. You got to hit him somewhere in the pocketbook, really. Ultimately.
Yeah, you really do. It's a multi-pronged approach, I think, and I think that's kind of what's gonna be successful in shutting down the industry. You kind of have to hit all of the areas at once. We have to hit it with legislation. We have to hit it with like state level and federal level legislation.
Right.
Which don't even get me started on that.
No, and one of the things that Alexei was talking about early on, I remember, like, this was real. You were really adamant about this whole idea of letting kids know that it's okay to be as disruptive and aggressively obstinate as possible, like, and to almost like to force the issue of like, oh no, you're gonna have to hurt me, like that kind of approach where you just say, no, I'm the bully now, like, and it could, because frankly it may be better to be arrested than to stay there.
Yes.
Alexei, how many of us who have been in jail have said, I will take years in jail over minutes in the TTI?
Right.
Of course.
So
and we all knew that. But the issue, the issue was, when you're inside, was trying to garner a group together to do this. It's near to impossible.
Sure. Right. If everybody in prison stood up and walked out at the same time, no one could stop them, right? But that's never ever going to happen, because no one's ever going to stand up together. Like, oh man, that is really the dynamic in TTI is really tough to do that, because you can't plan without staff knowing, and then if they know, they're going to put you in isolation and separate you. And automatically force the issue. Right. Like, what you need to do is to be able to plan for days and days and then all together do something. I mean, that's how... I mean, I did see that my old program a couple years back, Devereaux, had a riot there, and they had cops there for hours, and they were holding staff hostage. And I really love all that. That's really my kick. Right. I say fucking do that. What was the insurrection in Guam? Was it Guam?
I think so.
The big riot in Guam that got the place shut down. That was the first interview that we ever had, was that guy, and I don't remember his name. John, I think, something. But that was. I mean, that's an amazing way to take him out. Like, but. Good Lord, man, you're gonna get hurt. It's like,
you definitely are. I mean, the thing is, this is a martyrdom sort of tactic, right? So, you've got to be willing to fucking hurt, but you've also got to be willing, as someone in that situation, to foresee that you're going to get hurt anyway. You're already hurt,
right? True. True. Hey, I found that,
you're
by the way...
You're going to come out with so many scars anyway.
True.
You might as well fucking go the full way. I mean, if I could tell myself that now, if I could go back and tell myself that,
right,
it would be a different story.
Hey, I found the thread, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the staff thread. Really interesting stuff. So... This one editor says that they talked to about 30 former staff from 16 different programs, and the stories are all the same. And there's a little excerpt from an interview with a former dean of students at the program that this guy went to. It's unnamed. Yeah. But the question is, today if a friend or relative asks you what should be done about, quote, troubled teen, would you recommend one of these programs? Why or why not? And the answer is, it has been some 30 years since I worked there. I had a lot of time to think about this, and the truth is, I don't know the answer. That's already a bad answer.
That's horrible.
That's actually when I interviewed a staff, that same staff that I was just talking about. He was saying something very similar.
Yeah.
That when things like, because I asked him very something, you know, one of the biggest questions that we get as survivors from parents, especially on our Reddit, is, well, what do we do instead? And so I asked him that. He's not only worked in programs, but also worked extensively with neurodivergent kids outside of programs. And so I asked him, I was like, well, this is the question that we get the most. And, you know, most of these, a good significant portion of these kids that get sent to places are neurodivergent kids. Like, what are their options for when parents decide that they need residential? And when it came to, I mean, he went on for about 10, 12 minutes about it. Just, you know, it was a completely unrelated interview. It was not related to the TTI at all in any way.
Right.
We just got onto that topic, and he went on. It was the longest answer by far, by at least 3 times of any other answer he gave me. He just went on about the tactics that these places use to manipulate kids and parents and staff.
Sure.
And his answer to that was, there are no good programs. You keep your kids at home under your supervision in a safe place where you know that they're getting the care that they need for their trauma.
Right. Right.
Because that's what this comes down to. It's traumatized. I mean, that's the slogan I'm using for my podcast and my website is traumatized, not troubled.
Right.
Right.
In fact, that's the very thing we were talking about last night, Alexei.
Yesterday.
The whole idea of the type of parent who would do that in the first place. They have to be a certain type of person, basically, you know, a narcissistic bully, who really, troubled or not, you know, whether their kid is like, I swear to God, I saw this program years ago on this website. I was just kind of researching in general, like unknown or little known programs, just like, hey, what's going on over here in Georgia? And this like very evangelical program, you know, a lot of that's a lot of it too. But one of the main red flags that they wanted parents to look out for was boredom. You know, your kid's not that interested in what's going on. You know, maybe he's insolent or isn't you know, being a part of the family as you'd like them to be, or, you know, but not bad. Just kind of like, So this program is gonna fix your kid of boredom. I mean, it's that stupid. But just the idea that there's even a parent to advertise that to is crazy. Like, that's the reason. That's not a good reason. There aren't any good ones out there, and the like stun locks. Just like thinking about this stuff, like when I'm thinking about parents and staff and these poor kids caught in the middle, and everybody's wrong, but the voiceless child who's saying, "Wait, listen to me. This is what's really going on." And it's crazy.
There is no such thing as a troubled teen, and there is absolutely no reason why a parent should ever make this decision.
Right. I want to go back to what this guy was saying. He says, okay, so he says he doesn't know the answer. And then he continues, almost every time you have a teenager getting in trouble, like most of the girls that went to the island were, problem is most of the parents, and yet society expects us to fix. Okay, I see what this is. The problem is mostly the parents, so he's at least acknowledging that.
Correct.
And yet society expects us to fix the children, right? So the parents are the problem, but you got to fix the kid. It's an ugly catch-22. Leave the children with the same people that created the issue, and the issue is only going to get worse. I don't know if I believe that. I think I have an issue with that in some sense. It depends on the circumstance, I suppose, and a great deal with keeping the kid in the environment that created the issue. And then he goes on, concentrate all of these children together with all of these separate issues, expecting them to get better doesn't make any logical sense either. In either case, what you're doing is concentrating the problem. No, you're not in either case concentrating the problem. because it's not concentrated at home, it's individual. So that's a weird answer, because he starts off by saying he doesn't know, and then he actually gives a pretty interesting, somewhat reasonable answer regarding that it's never going to get better in the program, but he's arguing a little bit on the side that it could get worse without it still. That's strange.
Any thoughts on that, Ash?
I think it's funny that you pointed out that he says, I don't know, and then he goes into an actually very thought out answer. That's very common of the staff that I've talked to as well.
Right, it's like a cop-out, right?
Yeah, they start with the cop-out. They absolutely do.
Like, I don't know, I wasn't in charge, I just worked there. I saw some good things, I saw some bad things, but generally speaking, they're better off here than they were at home.
Well, and I mean, you can't negate the fact that for some kids that is the case. And a lot of the kids that come out of these programs and say, yeah, that worked for me, or that saved my life.
That's real.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah, and that's real though, too. Like, they really, really believe that, because it's really true in their case. Because they were getting, I don't know, beat up. Or
at least at home they had, or at least in the program, they had a roof over their head and they were getting 3 meals a day or whatever. Even if it was shit food,
That goes back to the idea of the problems at home being individual. And that grouping all these kids with disparate issues, like you got someone who likes drugs, you got a girl who likes boys, you got a boy who likes boys, and they don't have anything in common. But they're all together in the same group, doing the same things, listening to the same seminars, doing the same worksheets, and all of that, like doing the same chores. And that's just like, it just seems so obvious that isn't the right thing to do. And there's the answer, right? It's all about warehousing the kids, getting money, and saying that you're doing a good thing by keeping them off the streets. That's it.
Right.
That's it. Like, if you can argue that to someone and say, listen, wouldn't you rather have that kid here than next door to you?
Right.
You don't even have to be a parent to go, oh, hell yeah, I don't want that kid near me. And it's not even, and the kid doesn't even exist. It's just imaginary. Like, oh yeah, I wouldn't want a bad kid living next to me. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't want that homeless guy down the street, walking down my street. He's going to lower my property value. Wow.
Deep.
Well, yeah. It's good to revisit these conversations, though. And
this is a really, really good conversation.
I think
I think so too.
And I think we're gonna do it more often. I want to put stuff out constantly, not an interview once every couple weeks or month. Mm-hmm. Almost more like I like the control of recording and being able to edit and present things in a certain way. So not into like streaming, but really consistent episodes all the time.
That's kind of, I want to use, I'm starting a podcast. I'm launching it at the beginning of the year.
Uh-huh.
I actually have that former staff writing the music for me.
Oh, nice.
Which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, his music is incredible anyway. That's cool. I was going to launch it, but earlier, but then I talked to him and he was like, yeah, I'll work on it. But I know he takes time and they just got off a tour. So I was like, okay, I'll launch at the beginning of the year instead. But I do want to use that more like that traditional weekly episode kind of format, because the one thing that I've noticed in the activism side of this is that the more people speak up and the more people who are saying, well, yeah, that might have been a different program, but I had the exact same experience at my program 20 years earlier. It shows consistency and it's helping more people come out about it, which I think is the most important part, because being able to like put this into words finally and like finally feel like our voices have any value at all whatsoever is huge.
It is.
It's massive.
And
It's beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, and regardless of whatever you think of Paris Hilton and her spotlight on whatever it was she was trying to spotlight, maybe as feeble as that whole effort was, really, it's still valuable. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's incredibly valuable, but also, I want to say that, in that vein, like, what I see now from teens coming out of programs being able to talk about it, like, in a way that I certainly couldn't for years, even decade, it's incredible. And I think that's because we're talking about it.
Yeah. I agree.
And I think it's because we're talking about it in the way we're talking about it, which is the real way it should be talked about. And I think that is the most important part.
Right.
I agree.
Very unsugar-coated, straight to the point, not being afraid of. I mean, look, I understand like people who want to express their anonymity and don't want that kind of heat from whomever. But it's so important to just speak very bluntly about exactly what this is all about, And I really want to shout out Liz Ionelli in her new book, too.
Yes.
That, like, what an achievement. That's incredible. Like, she was with that what was the family group?
Family Foundation. Yeah.
Up in the Northeast. Anyway, so many of like her fellow students are gone, and that's another kind of unspoken part of this tragedy. How many people decide to call it a day because early on, before anything can really be reconciled, even like just because the trauma was that horrific. And so I really want to praise her for writing about that stuff, because it's just another one of those things that people aren't really very aware of, like because you do get folks coming out of these situations who will attest that it helped, and but then there's a whole other larger group of people that aren't saying anything because they're not here anymore. And it's really important to remember those folks, because
Ash, how many have you lost from your program?
14 out of 28 or 48.
That's
yeah. I'm about 30 out of 150.
Yeah. Those numbers are disturbingly high.
They are, and even people that I knew, right? Because just associated with the survivor community, like in the last couple of years, 3 or 4 people, like people that I was speaking to like days prior to, like just gone. Like, what? Yeah. So that's how important this all is.
This industry is it's a killing cult. It doesn't allow for life after it. It doesn't allow for much of a life after it.
No,
You've got to really fight hard.
So yeah, maybe that could be like the last thing to kind of talk about is what is re-entry like? Once you're there, and then because people do leave, right? So you're home, you're at the program, and then one day you're not. So what then?
I I took off in the middle of the night after packing a bag on a home visit and hitchhiked as fast as I could. And then I spent the next 6 months completely underground, constantly just moving. Because I felt like somebody was gonna, find me. And I spent like a year and a half on the streets hitchhiking up and down the West Coast because I had to just keep moving. Or else, the alternative in my mind, because my parents wouldn't let me come home. After about 6 months, I called them, and they were like, well, you can come home if you finish the program. I was 19 years old. I didn't know for another year after that even that I didn't have to go, like that I couldn't be involuntarily taken back.
Right, because you were an adult and suddenly you had rights.
Yeah, but I didn't know that till I was 20. It took me 2 years to even know that, like, I could say no to going back.
Wow. Yeah,
So I spent an extra year just hitchhiking and homeless on the streets because I felt like somebody was going to come find me and take me back because I didn't know that I could say no.
That's very common.
It is.
And I for different circumstances, different reasons, I was on the streets for a number of years, and so many of the people I encountered, especially the younger traveling kids, had exactly that same situation. Like
traveling kids. That's how I know that you've lived that world.
They couldn't go home.
Yes.
That's what they're called.
Right, they couldn't go.
Yes.
Like there was no home to go to, and then you'd run into like the tourists who could go home and wouldn't. Like
I wish I had had the balls to like tell people about this stuff when I was in that world, because I can almost guarantee I was not the only 18, 19, 20-year-old out there who came out of a program and had nowhere to go.
Do you know how all this started though with us? Marcus, was me.
Oh my
and
God,
you
Alexei, we haven't even told any of our stories of how any of us met.
No,
So
go ahead,
You just
Alexei.
made me realize that.
Right.
So I met Marcus on the beach in Venice, and he was homeless. Yeah.
And loving it.
But then I ended up on a farm with him in Oregon, and it was this crazy fucking pot farm that we were on that ended up not paying us. But it was there that I first threw out the hint to Marcus, hey, what do you think about straight ink? Do you know about straight ink? And I just kept kind of throwing hints at him about TTI, because I really didn't know how to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Now I just bring it
very
up.
Hard. It's hard to just like jump into it, you know? So
Sure.
it started with that, and then one day Marcus came back to me on the farm and went, straight ink? Holy shit. Holy shit. And I went, yeah.
There's always
and-
different ways to get people to make it click for people who haven't lived
Right.
in the TTI.
Right.
And for anybody who's been in a cult, straight ink is it.
I know I have this interesting story, but I don't generally know how to bring it up. Do you know what I mean? It's very hard.
Well, for one, for fear of the person that you're talking to having no clue what it is you're talking about, and then having to explain even further.
Yes.
Because you really have to start bearing your whole self.
You know, going back to the question of reintegration, so I came back to the place that laid foul and began living with my mother again. And that's when I stopped talking because of gaslighting that went on in that house. Because whenever I tried to talk about what had happened to me, it was always brought to my attention that my mom had no other choice, and that I forced the issue, and that it was my fault. You know, so I stopped talking for 2 years. I just stopped talking. And I had to really come to terms with things in my head and go through all the flashbacks that I was having. And, you know, just going through it, you know, figuring out each individual horrendous, you know, traumatic thing that I saw there and kind of seeing it from every angle. And then I had to go to therapy and talk about it and have someone else explain to me that that was abuse, you know?
Well,
and
and
that's kind of how I
I think that
how I
comes
came
back.
out of it.
I think that comes back to how what it's like to come out of these programs. I think a lot of us deal with that, and there is no, for the most part, there is no integration. It's you age out of the program and you're suddenly on your own. You do what I did and you run off, or you're put back in high school and it's like you haven't even been there for 2, 3, 4 years.
Right, depending on how long people are away. There's varying degrees of like ignorance that you come out with because you haven't been a part of the world. So,
well, and I mean, that reminds me, Alexei, you've met James.
Yeah.
He's a kid I'm mentoring who spent 13 of his 18 years in programs. He never went home once from age 10 to 18. And all he knows is trauma response. There is nothing else.
He's an amazing kid, Marcus. I met him at prom.
Nice.
He's incredible.
So this is all about the environment that you're in. Like, everyone's going to respond different ways to different environments. And if someone has been under attack constantly, they're going to continue to feel like they've been, under attack, even when they're not, until you foster some kind of trust by just being a nice person to them,
Right.
And I'm sure you can, relate to that with your mentorship stuff, Ashleigh. The idea that that you need to try to fix and change somebody can be so off base,
So that former staff who I know, I went to one of his concerts recently, and he talks a little bit between songs, which I love. But one of the things that he said at the show that I went to was, because he's a therapist now, he says, as I've been able to work as a therapist and build my career in that world, I've learned even more that what people crave, people who are struggling, is not to be preached to, not to be told what they need or how to be fixed, but they want to know that someone cares enough to listen and understand how hard life is for them and how heavy it feels for them. Later on, he said, we just need somebody who wants to put in the work to understand what our darkness looks like and sit with us in that darkness and not be afraid and run away once they realize the extent of it.
We have reached a point where we've been heard and we know we're not crazy anymore. And it's different once you've been heard and once you've been publicized. It's different. Things change.
People look at you like, oh, I know about that. Like, oh, yeah, I heard that about
We don't yet know about a potential third suspect who was seen speeding away from federal agents at the scene. The whole thing had been a mystery to neighbors.
This is not an accident. This is pure negligence.